Good morning and welcome to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is 9 a.m. Wednesday, April 17th, 2024. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is citizen input. So we do have a request to speak by Mr. Carl Shoemaker. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Carl Shoemaker. I live in Bend. About school choice and voucher programs and parental choice. Public schools cannot by law exclude students from going to them based on disability, religion, LGBTQ+ status, English proficiency, and other factors. They are required by law to accept every student in their district, no matter any of those factors I just mentioned. Private schools, even when receiving taxpayer money via voucher program, can choose to reject students based on whatever criteria they or their parents may choose. This is exclusionary and unfair. It's just a new form of separate but equal idea that was around when I was a child, and some people weren't educated equally. Also, young children in private schools who are not exposed to a broader spectrum of society once they graduate have to deal with adjusting to a broader society. Jessica Levin, Deputy Litigation Director at the Education Law Center and Director of Public Funds for Public Schools, states voucher programs usually permit participating private schools to discriminate based on disability, religion, LGBTQ+ status, English proficiency, and other factors that public schools could never use to exclude or discipline students. Vote or lose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. Is there anyone else for citizen input? Is there anyone online with a raised hand? Okay, seeing none. Welcome, Doreen Tai. Thank you for joining us. Looks like you've joined the meeting, so just the mute button.
Sorry.
There we go.
Good morning, commissioners. Just a quick thing on, you guys sprayed weed killer at the airport this week, and I know you guys got to do something, but please try to remember that there's a compounding effect with lead and herbicides, pesticides, and we are just, it's the highest airborne lead pollution in the state. So if we can find another way to protect citizens out here, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for your testimony. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
And I will second it. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And Chair will vote yes. Or Vice Chair acting as Chair. Action items, item number 5, Oregon Department of Energy Community Renewable Energy Grant Program. Oh, got all kinds of folks.
Good morning, commissioners. For the record, Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager. Feels really loud. Am I loud?
Hot one today.
Morning, Brent Harding, Facilities Department, Project Coordinator.
Lee Randall, Facilities Director.
This morning, we're here before you because the Oregon Department of Energy Community Renewable Energy Grant Program has sent out their notice of funding opportunity for round 3 of this, what we call the CREP grant program. The county has applied for this grant program, in rounds 1 and round 2, excuse me, and we're successful in both those rounds. And we would like to submit an application for round 3 to continue a project that we were working on in round 2. For this particular grant opportunity, we'd like to apply for a $1 million construction grant program. And I'm going to turn it over to the experts to the left of me to talk a little bit more detail about that actual project.
So we'd like to provide a brief update on the progress so far. We're currently at 30% of design. We've contracted with a local engineering firm for that work. And in a real positive part of the project that I'm excited about is we've had Oregon State University interns be a part of the project, which I think has been a great part of the project as well. We've also met with the North Unit Irrigation District. They're planning a project on a much larger scale nearby, and so we're looking for any synergy that we can find with their project. There is a significant difference in scale and timing of their project. It's much larger than what we have envisioned at the fairgrounds, and it may likely be further out given the amount of funding that they're seeking long term. But we've had one initial meeting. The next step will be to have the members of the design team meet and begin looking at design opportunities where the two projects may be able to be compatible. One possibility is that given that our project may move forward sooner or be completed sooner, is to build into each project the opportunity for interconnection. And so that's probably the one area that we'll look more closely at. This point, Brent's going to provide a little update of the details of the 30% design so far.
So what we're looking at doing is building a 375 kilowatt power generation. This will have the capacity of about 1,800 kilowatt hours, and that'll provide us with 48 hours of backup storage. This will support a water system for potable water and irrigation as well, with a future expansion of the well.
That's our update at this point. We're happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Any questions?
You answered my 2 questions that I posed last week, so I'm good.
Is this solar panels on existing facilities or a new structure possibly? Yeah. So surface area of somewhere out at the fairgrounds, and then a battery backup storage. So kind of taking it to the next level to have that opportunity to utilize that energy off peak or when the sun's not out or whatever. Yeah.
We've done a structure analysis of the Big Fresh Arena. That wasn't a viable option, so we've come up with some different opportunities for the actual panels themselves. And then we have designed the battery storage system and inverters to go along with that.
Great. And I know that the energy engineering program at OSU, sounds like that's maybe the program you're working with. It's been in place for 10, 12 years now, and it's really a great opportunity, launching point for people to get degrees in the field as it's evolving. So it's really exciting being able to work with them.
I guess my one question would be, so you're looking at building in interconnection opportunities with this larger scale North Unit microgrid project. Does that cost more? And if so, is that going to be part of this grant application, or is that something you're contemplating separately?
In that we're at 30% design, I think as we go forward, the engineering team will look closely at what the opportunity is, whether there's an interconnection opportunity in working with Pacific Power and the grid itself. And then secondly, if we would intend to hopefully include it in the $1 million construction grant, if we find that it's viable, and that's what we'll be exploring over the next several months as we move forward in design.
Exciting.
Wonderful. Is there a motion?
I'll move to authorize submittal of an application for a community renewable energy grant from the Oregon Department of Energy for solar power and EV charging stations at the Fair and Expo Center.
Oh, and then EV charging stations. I guess we haven't heard about that. So I'll second it. Tell me about that real quick. Any?
So additionally, we're going to install 10 charging stations with the capacity to add an additional 10 in the future.
Great. Okay. Any other discussion?
No.
Seeing none, Commissioner Chang
Yes.
and Chair will vote yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Exciting. Item number 6, application for Criminal Justice Commission grant to establish deflection program in accordance with House Bill 4002. Yeah, what's the latest?
Good morning, Commissioners. Holly Harris, Behavioral Health Director. I am here today to request approval to apply for the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission Deflection Program grant funding. So just a couple of highlights around this. As you know, the Measure 110 reforms that recriminalize small amounts of drug possession and also created a pathway for deflection from those charges. And so Deschutes, as you know, was one of the first what considered early adopters of this program, one of 23 counties, which essentially means that we are guaranteed up to 50% of the allocated funding that's coming to us. And so the total amount that was allocated for Deschutes is $756,672. This application, this initial application, will get us the $378,336 to really kind of spend the time developing and implementing what program we want here in Deschutes with all of the relevant partners. So there's essentially 2 phases to this, and I'm in phase 1 here before you, which is to submit a short form application. The entire grant program is administered by the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission through the Impacts Grant Program. And as you know, we are already a Impacts Grant recipient, so this is a very familiar platform to us and process. The short form application is really intended to be a high level overview of what type of program Deschutes County plans to implement. The details do not have to be worked out at this stage. That's what the planning funding is for. It really, some of the key decision points that need to be in this application have to be who will be the applicant, who will be the fiduciary, and then who will take on the coordination responsibilities. So we were able to rapidly get a group of about 25 folks, relevant stakeholders, DA's office, the courts, all of our law enforcement partners, et cetera, together to talk about to get these questions answered so that we could submit the short form application by next week. So it was a very fast moving process. We were able to get it done. And essentially what our community decided, with your approval, of course, is that we would like to implement a law enforcement assisted diversion program, otherwise known as LEAD. So similar to what Marion County has in their community, similar to what Seattle has done in their community. These are evidence-based programs. And they really can be tailored to your community's resources and needs and what your community desires to do with these types of programs, which is nice. You don't have to do exactly what Marion County is doing or exactly what Seattle's doing. So what our community, because we have such wonderful relationships with each other, quite frankly, with all of our law enforcement partners, with our behavioral health resource network partners, our BURN partners, and the community mental health program, we really decided we could do a really creative approach where when law enforcement encounters somebody out in the community that is now in possession of small amounts of drugs, deflection eligible amounts, they can be offered deflection. If appropriate, we have 2 burn providers that have raised their hand to want to be a part of this work, which is Ideal Options and Best Care. Both have long-standing histories in the substance use disorder world, lots of expertise. In fact, one of our burn providers ran the Marion County LEAD program, was also involved in the Seattle program. So we have a lot of internal expertise to help us develop it. So those 2 partners will be able to respond 24/7 to the scene with law enforcement, if that's what's appropriate. To really make that initial connection, which is what the legislation was all about, making that point of contact, starting to build rapport and engagement, and offer follow-up services. If the individual is willing to accept that and they do the follow-up requirements that are still yet to be developed as part of the program, then their charges can be dismissed and their record expunged. And so where the CMHP comes into this is that the group really felt, because the CMHP has been doing the behavioral health work for a long time. We have the infrastructure as well as we're Impacts Grant recipients. They have asked that we be the coordinator. So we would be asking for an FTE to be responsible for the grant program activities, the tracking requirements, the facilitation of all the community partner meetings, the ongoing program requirements, and would also be the fiduciary. So then passing through the dollars to our community partners for them to build up their resources to be able to respond to these situations.
Sorry,
So that's the first part.
I may have just missed this. When you say we, are you referring to behavioral health? Are you referring to the county organization, or
Referring to the
some other-
CMHP, me, i.e. me. So it's me for now until we get a coordinator hired that can then take on the sort of day-to-day operations. But right now, we really have the relationships. And our partners ask that we take this role on.
So the behavioral health side of the health department of
Yes.
Deschutes County.
Yes, correct. So that's kind
the
of,
coordinating role, the
Yes.
fiscal administrative role, and
Yep.
and the applicant role.
yes. And also, I mean, we bring the behavioral health expertise too. So as we know, many people with substance use disorders also suffer from a co-occurring mental health disorder. We want to be able to offer our mobile team to assist when appropriate. We want to be able to offer the stabilization center to assist when appropriate, and really be able to meet the variety of needs that we're going to encounter with this population in a really robust way. So we'll bring that level of expertise to the table as well.
Has there been any discussion about kind of the priority of whose choices it is? I'm just thinking, so law enforcement, we've got a situation here, we bring in behavioral health or the diversion program, who makes the call, I guess, is that clear yet at this point in time?
Well, I mean, law enforcement will always be able to make the call as to whether or not whether they meet the criteria for deflection based on the law. And there could be other extenuating factors. Maybe the person's dangerous, or maybe they're just combative at that moment and not really ready. So in that initial contact, law enforcement will take the lead on that. However, there will be opportunities through the process, the criminal justice process, where there could be other opportunities to offer people deflection, whether the DA's office wants to do it, or whether behavioral health intervenes and says, actually, they're engaging with us. We'd really like to see them go through this program. So that's kind of the beauty of it, is it's not a one and done necessarily. And as we know, people, sometimes their readiness, waxes and wanes. And so we are able to kind of be flexible with that.
So yeah, multiple opportunities for deflection.
Exactly.
Even if it's a really bad dynamic situation at public safety for the moment. Okay, we have to stabilize, and then it's going to be offered again and again.
Yes, it could be.
Yeah, understood. Great.
I mean, I bet there's going to be a whole bunch of different scenarios. I'm wondering, could one scenario be that, law enforcement responds to a fentanyl or other overdose, and, it's administering Narcan to somebody, and then, when they wake up, or, when they become alert, then, that's when the discussion about criminal charges or deflection, that's when that starts.
It could be. There's a lot of details to be worked out around that. I think and that's thankfully we have a little bit more time to kind of figure out all those details.
Yeah.
And what types of charges could potentially also be eligible, but outside of just possession charges. So those are the conversations that we'll be having with, the DA is a critical partner in these discussions, as are law enforcement in the courts. So we'll work out all those details over the course of the next couple of months. We have to submit a long form application by, I think it's sometime at the end of May. So that's kind of our time frame from now until about end of May. We need to kind of figure out the details, and thankfully we have expertise to rely on in our community to say how are other communities doing this that have lead programs? What are some of the things they've learned along the way? And then once we submit that long form application, that's when the other 50% of our funding will come to us. And the funding technically ends June 30th, 2025. That's the end date for the legislation and the funding, or not the legislation, but the funding tied to the legislation. However, there is all indications that there's a lot of interest in continuing this funding longer term. So I think, if we develop a successful program when we're showing good outcomes, we have high hopes that we'll see continued funding.
So the term lead, law enforcement assisted diversion, is that what we're saying? So that's kind of a new terminology, or
It's been a while, actually, in Seattle and Marion County. It's new
statewide.
in our world.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
And so is deflection. That was a new term for me. We usually.
Oh,
use
yeah. Is it
diversion.
diversion or deflection then?
Yeah.
So when you say lead, are you referring to?
It is a deflection program. It is essentially a goal to divert people who are willing to engage in some type of behavioral health or substance use disorder treatment, to divert them from entering the criminal justice system and having that on their record long term.
To get into the terminology a little bit, would you consider deflection a subset of diversion, or is it different than diversion? Because I mean, someone was trying to tell me the other day, diversion is after somebody goes to court.
No, see, I think of it as the opposite.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've had a forensic diversion program for many years now, and our goal has really been to keep people from coming up for law enforcement, to keep them from, even getting that citation or arrest or booking or anything. So it's a lot of pre-work. I almost see deflection as somebody, now we've got a citation. They've been caught with some type of possession charge, and we're going to deflect them from entering that system further. That's sort of how I separate the two, but there's a lot of overlap.
So then, our former adult treatment court program, like what's the label for that?
I mean, I sort of see that as in the deflection category, though a little bit further down the system. I mean, you had to have gotten charges, your charges are being held, your records, there's a robust program involved. You're going to court for those hearings each month. So this is really outside of the court system. Like, we don't even want it to get there.
Right.
We want to be able to have them just connect with providers, treatment providers, and if they're successful in doing that, they won't even go to court. So that's the hope. Yeah.
Got to reorganize my labels.
Yeah, well, we're all trying to reorganize our labels right now.
So we've discussed the role of law enforcement. We've discussed the role of the CMHP, the Behavioral Health Department. You mentioned the DA's office. I'd like to understand a little bit better kind of what they're doing as part of this whole sequence. And I also wanted to ask about community justice, whether they have any roles in this, because they clearly had some really important roles in the adult treatment court program. But, is there a role for parole and probation in this program?
There's a role for it's really critical that all the players you just mentioned, including the burn providers, Ideal Options and Best Care, that are all very much at the table. And it's similar to the drug court model in that, there will be we have to work out all these details, but there will likely be regular meetings, weekly, biweekly, maybe monthly, depending on what's needed, of those critical partners, the DA's office, community justice, burn providers, community mental health program, courts in the room, public defenders, really, talking about these cases in an effort to help people be successful in this program. So those people really have to be at the table. The DA's office is absolutely a critical partner. And again, in case something gets missed out in the community or somebody wasn't ready for deflection, there's opportunities kind of further down the system, including in community justice, potentially. And I think that's really the details we have to work out, is what specific role and at what points does everybody have the ability to sort of refer into the deflection program. But they very much need to be at the table. They're a part of this community development, the program development effort, including the public defenders and the courts. So they were at the initial meeting, and they'll be at the ongoing meetings until we get our program more well-defined.
So you also mentioned that this lead program model has been implemented in other places, and we have the ability to tailor it for our, essentially for our local capacities and our local relationships. Do you have a sense of how our program might be a little bit different than Seattle or Marion County or someplace else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for instance, in Marion County, the coordinator role is housed under the sheriff's office. So you can have a more criminal justice focused lead program where it's kind of led by law enforcement, it's run by law enforcement and the courts and the DA's office, and maybe the the treatment providers are sort of just contributors to it. Our community really wanted it to be led by the behavioral health department. So I think that says something about what type of model we're looking at, where our focus is to get people into treatment. Not that Marion County isn't, because they're doing great work in Marion County, but I think it's kind of what lens you want to lead the program efforts. And I think our community was pretty aligned on that.
I guess one more question. So in one of the early meetings that I was able to watch, someone from the DA's office said, well, we actually set up a deflection program earlier that we never really got to use called Goldilocks. Is the model that you're developing, will it use components of that? I mean, was there lessons learned or kind of systems put in place, kind of plans created during that whole process that are going to be useful now?
I'm sure. Yes. So Goldilocks became the Clean Slate program. It operated for a couple of years, but then when Measure 110 happened, it really became kind of a program that really didn't find much usefulness at that point, because there was just no crimes to be deflected from. So that was sort of what that program sort of whittled away at that point. But there's a ton of lessons learned, I'm sure, about how this can look, because the concept is very similar. And I brought that up to legislators during the time when this was all being discussed. It's like it kind of had a model that looks pretty similar to what you're all talking about that I think we can learn from here in Deschutes. So I'm sure those lessons learned will be coming up as we develop this program.
Right. Yeah, always good to take advantage of past work.
Yes, absolutely. And we want it to be, we need it to be easy for law enforcement to be able to refer people. We need responsiveness from our treatment providers. So those are all the things that we know to work right now, even with mobile crisis response. Like if it's not responsive, if it's not 24/7, if it's not easy enough for law enforcement to do, then these things can not be successful. But I think we've all learned a lot of lessons around that we'll be able to use.
Great. Thank you.
Any thoughts on the resources and response time for ideal options and best care, being at the table? Because that's what we hear. It's like, okay, well, here's a piece of paper, go see him. We can schedule 3 weeks from now, which is always so awkward.
No, this is a priority. So thankfully, with the resources that will be coming our way, we can add capacity to those two programs to be able to respond. I can't remember the timeframes right off the top of my head, but it's we cannot wait a day or two. I mean, it needs to be, right. If they want us to come on scene at the time, we know we don't want law enforcement sitting around waiting for us to get there, waiting for them to get there. So there will be, 20-minute response kind of timeline to be able to get to them. And if they can't, if it's not safe for somebody to respond to the scene or the individual's not quite ready, there will be easy access into those two systems and prioritization for this population so that they're not waiting weeks.
Is the stabilization center a step in there, or is that a different? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to work through that. I mean, we have enough resources around this population that I think we're able to tailor to what that individual might need. If they need a stabilization center service, then absolutely that'll be available to them. If they really don't, and it's primarily substance use and they want to work with one of those two entities, that's an option for them too.
Yeah, great. Well, at AOC, I know the Association of Oregon Counties, big community discussions happening around the state here. And I do really feel empowered by our engagement, because remember a week or two ago, they were calling for everybody to come to the table. And I knew that we had a lot of people representing Deschutes County. So it's good that we are right in the middle of this conversation at the state level too.
We are. And there's another meeting on May 9th that's happening in Salem around this topic. I can't remember who's leading it. I think it might be through the DA's Association. But I'm participating on a panel for representing the behavioral health side. We have a robust attendance from our community at that meeting as well. So we're well poised.
Great.
One more question, kind of administrative bureaucratic question. So this granting opportunity is being woven into the Impacts Grant Program. And we're going to talk more about the Impacts Grant Program in a minute. When I first heard about deflection funding coming through the Impacts Grant Program, during the legislative session, I was actually really concerned that basically that the gears for the Impacts Program were going to switch, and that they might pull our stabilization, our crisis response funding. And so can you talk a little bit about how that are these going to be two separate impacts grants?
They are.
Okay.
It's the Impacts program. And then there's two grants that are kind of underneath that program. And so our funding for the Stabilization Center through our Impacts grant is stable. In fact, we received a slight increase in that funding, which I'll talk about in the next agenda item. And this is a separate track that is additional funding. So there was no pulling from the original Impacts funding to support this program, which I was very grateful for because that would have been going backwards.
Well, that kind of reminds me, and you may have a view on this, because the original Measure 110 was just going to divert a lot of taxes to a pool of resources, and then it just didn't quite all flow the way. Is there a big pool of resources somewhere that the state's kind of still jockeying with? Do you have a feel for that?
110 reform. Yeah, so the measure with the burn funding that we received millions of dollars in behavioral health resource network funding, and we did do a ton with that funding, and it really did provide additional resources for people struggling with substance use disorder. The Taylor Center is something Best Care has stood up, which is a drop-in center for in low barrier, quick access to substance use disorder treatment. We were able to expand substance use disorder services at the Stabilization Center and for youth at the Drop, as well as our harm reduction services through that funding. And that funding has remained steady. So it also did not get reduced in order to support this effort, which was great because there's a lot of infrastructure. I think the piece we were missing was how to get people to come to those services for those that were just really not willing or ready. So this sort of is, I'm glad they kept the resources there, because without the resources, this new reform wouldn't have worked the way that they were intending.
It's right back to the same, we're adding to this impacts. So.
Exactly.
This is the main reason why I was supportive of the proposed Measure 110 reform from the police chiefs, the sheriffs, the DAs, and the cities, is because it didn't call for a complete repeal of Measure 110, including the burn funding. It called for surgically addressing the criminal charges for possession of controlled substances, and left the expansion in capacity funding alone.
Right.
Great. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval to apply for Oregon Criminal Justice Commission Deflection Program grant funding.
And I will second it. Good discussion. Is there anything else?
I'm really excited about this program.
So are we.
So, seeing no other discussion, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and I will vote yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the next item, kind of along these same lines, item 7, Oregon Criminal Justice Commission Impacts Grant Funding Term Extension.
Yes. So I'm here to request approval to accept the CJC Impacts Grant Extension and Maintenance Funding. Because of all of the efforts around deflection and creating this new grant program under Impacts, they made the internal decision to not have us go through a reapplication process for this grant right now, because their efforts really need to be focused on standing up this other grant very, very quickly. So that really benefited us in that they are just going to extend our current grant for 1 year. We'll have to reapply in June 30th of 2025. But that extended it, and it increased the amount slightly to 1.3 million and change to continue our efforts at the Stabilization Center. At one point in time, this funding did cover most of our costs at the Stabilization Center to be 24/7. As you know, our costs have increased due to lots of factors, personnel costs increase, benefits costs, all of those things. And so this funding does not entirely cover our services anymore, but we were able to secure some funding through the legislature, as you know, to help kind of fill that gap. So this buys us another year, which we're very excited about, and we're able to continue serving the public.
And just a little bit of indirect costs going to be proposed in the budget. It talks about in here also.
It does. Yes, we do need to, and hopefully we're able to get, I don't think in this one, I know the federal government just allowed for up to 15%, but I don't think some of the grants entities have been able to make those processes happen. So I think it's only up to 10% on this one.
Okay. So, what is the full cost of the operation of the Stabilization Center for a year in comparison to this $1.3 million?
Would ask me that right now. I don't. I've been out of it just long enough that I don't have the exact number. But what I do know is that we went into this year with about $1.5 million, $2 million gap, which the $1.5 million from the legislature this year was very much welcomed. And we were one of the only projects that were actually already operational. These were, as you know, for shovel-ready projects, so startup costs for many programs, but because we had never really received any, state level funding at that level, and we were demonstrating good outcomes, we were eligible for that amount, and it really helped fill that gap.
So between that 1.5 million plus this impacts grant, we're in a good place.
We're in a good place till June 30th of 2025.
Well, and I remember when we were, evaluating, putting our program in place, we were looking at other programs around the country and the state and the country. And now we're looked at by many. So that's really interesting dynamic.
It really is. It has been interesting, and we're happy to pay it forward because lots of those places helped us get up and running, and we're sharing everything we have so that other communities can get one as well.
Yeah.
I mean, good to June 30th, 2025 with these two pieces of state funding. What assumptions does that make about local contributions?
It's assuming that everything remains pretty stable with the exception of a few items that are probably not going to be available to us this year. But we have enough internal resources. We have enough through just some of our state contract dollars that also got some COLA increases. And the state funding will help us get to that point. And then we'll have to, obviously be working diligently this year. Well, I anticipate we'll get the impacts funding, for the second year after June 30th. We'll reapply. I don't see why we wouldn't receive that. We've shown to be a successful program. So I expect to reapply in June 30th to get that for one more year. And then we have to wait and see if the legislature continues to approve impacts funding. As you know, this past legislative session, the long session, it came through a Christmas tree bill at the last minute, at the 11th hour. So we have to watch it year to year. And I just, I continue to advocate that we encourage the legislature to continue to support that program. It's critical for the support of the Stabilization Center.
We should be flagging that for our legislative advocacy in
Absolutely.
in the next few months before the long session starts.
That would be great.
Is there a motion?
I'll move approval to accept additional grant funding from the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission to support the Stabilization Center and extend the term of the grant through June 30th, 2025.
And I will second it. And you led off with, this is not a reapplication. So it's good to know that, this is one of those variables that will, put out there for another fiscal year at least. So
Exactly.
any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would, Holly, I would like to see, and I know this isn't your job anymore. You can decide somebody to do this, but I would like to see a breakdown of, these are all the costs for the Stabilization Center for a year. Here's all the funding sources. Because I would like to get a much more detailed understanding of those local pieces we're assuming, and kind of the stability of those in future years, and also just seeing how much state funding is going in this year. I mean, the state basically keeps bailing us out in certain ways, so it'd be good to understand what we might need to be able to cover in the future at the local level.
I'd be happy to provide that. And that is within my job. So I'm happy to do that.
Well, and we can talk about that during the budget process. And yeah, we're looking at the trajectory of our general fund and just the total cost of doing business. So, I mean, let's definitely take a big picture look at that.
And I'm pretty certain we already have something outlined and
Yeah,
you're asking for, so I'd be happy
that's
to
coming right up.
share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we did have a item number 8, discussion and possible action on property identified for the land exchange for the Department of State Lands that has been moved to next week. Commissioner Dare wasn't able to join us today, so we've put that off to next Wednesday's meeting in case that's what you came for today.
It will come on Monday, sorry, because Deputy County Administrator Eric Crop could be here on Monday, but not on
Next, when is it then?
Monday, the 22nd.
Okay, so it's gonna be Monday,
22nd.
Monday the 22nd there. So that's the latest information on that.
We got a bunch of public comment about that item. Can we just notify people that item was was postponed. And
As a response to those emails specifically.
yeah, just to let those people know that their input was received, and we'll
Great.
be considering it on Monday. Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, other items, any updates or other items?
I went to the, I was invited by the Sisters Park and Recreation District and the Central Oregon Council on Aging to give a presentation on water stuff yesterday in Sisters, and put together a little PowerPoint presentation on work on Waichus Creek over the last 20 years. Provide that to them. Feel good story.
There was a request for letter of support for Core 3 that came through. I don't know, did that slip by? We're going to try to do that. I'd be supportive. So from Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer's office saying that there may be dollars available through FEMA Emergency Operations Center grant program, which just happens to fit this project. It's a $2 million ask from Core 3 in partnership with COIC. Have you seen that, Commissioner? There's an email that came yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see it.
So, and they were asking for a response by yesterday afternoon. So I just brought it up today. So if we can just,
So this is not a congressionally directed spending.
as to say, request through community project funding from Department of Homeland Security, FEMA Emergency Operations Center grant program. So it just looks like a program that,
Sounds like it might be a congressionally directed spending
oh, well,
allocation. It's
Yeah.
a community program, community project.
Homeland Security account, Emergency Operations Center grant program.
I mean, I'm supportive either way. I just want to, if it's a community initiated program, a community congressionally directed spending allocation, I just want us to all be aware of what we're expressing support for.
Yeah, I mean, do you read it like that? I'm thinking it's a,
That community project funding.
yeah, so it does
Not
say
sure.
through community project funding from.
Yeah.
So maybe it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, they, for all those congressionally directed spending requests, what's different now, in the age of earmarks, you could just throw out this thing and ask for money for it. Now, essentially, all those congressionally directed spending allocations come through existing programs. So
Yeah, so that, yeah, okay, so,
So it
so
could-
by having the
could
word
very well
community
be.
project funding, that's what it's referring to.
maybe it means that it's a congressionally directed spending allocation under this program. And yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Either way, I want us to be clear if we're supporting a congressionally directed spending allocation, that we're doing that.
Yeah, so I'm supportive also at this time, for this project, as I say, Department of Homeland Security account. So as I say, maybe there's the wording is a little deeper there, but I'm deep into it and it's going to be good for everybody to, move this forward for phase one. Basically, it's like a $40 million phase one that we're trying to get resources for. So I'll make this motion then if you're going to support it. So supporting a Core 3 ask to the Community Project Fund from Department of Homeland Security account in the amount of $2 million. It's just a letter of support. And it's been seconded.
Support for that.
Yep. Okay, any other discussion?
Guess I'd just say, since Core 3 is being framed as proposed as a facility that's going to provide really important regional or statewide emergency services, I think that this is a very appropriate place to seek funding.
Very good. So with that, I'll call for the vote. Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes also. So then just two other notes, served ice cream yesterday, free cone day at Ben and Jerry's and Old Mill. So that was just an opportunity. I walked in and the mayor, Ben, was serving ice cream. So the first opportunity was for her to hand me a free cone of ice cream, but then we switched places right away. I didn't get a photo of me handing one to her, but we had a good time working there. And it was great community effort, outreach for everybody coming through Also, a little project down in Lapine installing toddler playground equipment at the Park District. So it's just a project I heard of, so I stopped by and say hi. So it was toddler equipment at the Lapine Park and Recreation District, new chips, new equipment, all kinds of stuff put in. Anything else? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.